Hello everyone, and welcome to the sixth Q&A video. This one is celebrating the fact that I have now reached 900 subscribers on YouTube. Thanks to all of you. So let's begin with your great questions. Michelle Garner asked, by the way, Michelle Garner is part of the literary duo known as OG Rose, together with Daniel Garner. They have a great YouTube channel, which I follow and recommend. They also post some of their writings on Medium, and they also have a great website. Just wanted to note that before I read Michelle's question. So she begins with very generous and kind remarks, saying, "Thank you so much, Davood. Happy to be a subscriber to your great channel. Congratulations on all you're doing. Thank you very much." Now the question, what is the number one reason you decided to leave academia, at least for now? And the second question is, what is the biggest thing you learned from teaching in formal education? Thank you for your great questions. It is difficult to talk about a number one reason because my decision had several different layers and different facets, which is not to say that it was a difficult decision. It ended up being a relatively easy decision. And I am a kind of person who manages to make easy decisions difficult. And even for me, this ended up being an easy decision. Kind of like the decision to get married. It is a complex decision, but it was also an easy decision. Ideally, it should be an easy decision. Now, maybe I should also mention something else before jumping into an answer. There is this general perception of universities and academia, general patterns, how things tend to work in general in universities, and then a concrete relationship with a particular institution. And those are the two sides of my decision, the two general sides of my decision. Kind of similar, again, to the decision to get married. There's this idea of marriage, which it is necessary to accept it, to embrace it, to understand it in a positive way. And then there is the relationship with one singular person. So a decision to get married has those two sides, similar to this decision to either enter into an academic life, academic position, or leave an academic position or academic life. So let me just confine myself to generalities. In general, my discontent with academia has had a lot to do with the emphasis on productivity or hyper-productivity, which I think it is quite unproductive. People are expected to have these shiny research programs, to deliver a lot in very short time, to frame their research and their findings under the best possible light, which I believe tends to distort their findings. Even the good research that is done tends to get distorted because of that salesmanship, because of that overemphasis on originality, novelty. I wrote one of the last things I wrote as an academic when I was in that position was a book chapter called Experimental Psychology and Distortions of Common Sense. In that chapter, I argued how some of the things that we have access to, just by virtue of using language, by virtue of being language users, having reflective capacities, being able to reflect and think, some of those things that we already have access to get distorted because of so-called scientific psychology. So that hyperproductivity, I think, the short-term focus and the aggressive framing and selling of research comes at the cost of genuine things, genuine interest, genuine curiosity, genuine human relationships. Those things are, I think, diminished. And I think, yeah, that those would be together in one bag, they would be my number one reason for leaving academia and being happy with that decision. I feel alive now. I feel like I can breathe even though I might be poor, um, financially insecure, and uncertain about my future, about the practical sides of my life and my future, but I feel an alertness and a sense of being alive that is more valuable to me than being financially secure. Your second question is, what is the biggest thing you learned from teaching informal education? One thing that comes to my mind is this discovery that I had because of teaching for a few years, and this is again and again. It was a discovery that came to me on several occasions, and this people summarize this insight when they say less is more. So the content that I aim to teach shouldn't be a lot. It should always be less than what I initially plan. It should be less. There is this acting masterclass video, like a masterclass held by Michael Caine, which I would highly recommend watching if you're interested in performance, acting, performing on arts. Michael Caine in that masterclass talks about a great director who gave this advice to an actor playing a part in a movie, and the advice was just less, do less. And he kept giving that advice until the actor said, "If I do any less, I won't be doing anything." And the director said, "Exactly." So that tendency towards silence, the tendency towards doing nothing, is, I think, one of the things that I discovered how important it is to emphasize form rather than content, to emphasize the character of a teacher, to demonstrate the character of thinking, clear thinking, critical thinking, careful thinking. They come from a character, and that character, that standpoint, that attitude, that approach, it has to be unpacked carefully and not in a way that is rushed. So that's, I think, the sentiment, less is more. What else? What else did I learn in teaching? The other thing that I learned was that relationship is more important than content. So the relationship between the teacher and the student is far more important than what the teacher says in the class. Without the relationship, the content would be useless for the most part, especially in the subjects that I taught having to do with human life, human psychology, human experience. Maybe for subjects like the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, mathematics, maybe the relationship is less important, could be downplayed for those courses, but in courses like philosophy and psychology and the humanities in general, I think the relationship is really important. It is part of the teaching. It is part of the education for the students. All right. Niall asked, congratulations, Davood. I'm curious, what do you usually do when you are mentally exhausted? How do you wind down after a long day of work or reading? What's your go-to thing? Do you ever have difficulty switching off in the evening? Also, how are you finding Canada? Let's start with the last one because it's the easiest one. So far, so good. We have been here for a month now. As you probably know, I don't know if I told you or not, but I did my doctoral degree. I did my master's and PhD at the University of Toronto, so I'm not completely new to Toronto and Canada. But it's good. So far, so good. It's good to be back. I've reconnected with family members and several of my great friends, and looking forward to see what else is going to happen. So your first question about being mentally exhausted reminded me of something that I was reading yesterday in Carl Jung's, this collection is the basic writings of Carl Jung. Here there's a chapter here on, taken from Symbols of Transformation, on different ways of thinking. I think it's called two kinds of thinking or two types of thinking. And in this chapter, Jung quotes passage from William James, William James's Principles of Psychology, believe it or not. Let's read together the James quote and then follow with what Jung says. So James also talks about, I have a video about this. I have a video called Dostoevsky on Mind Wandering. In that video, I think I talk about James's discussion of types of thinking. So the James passage is the following. Much of our thinking consists of trains of images, suggested one by another, of a sort of spontaneous reverie of which it seems likely enough that the higher brutes should be capable. This sort of thinking leads nevertheless to rational conclusions, both practical and theoretical. As a rule, in this sort of irresponsible thinking, the terms which come to be coupled together are empirical concretes, not abstractions. End quote. So that was the passage by James. There's a kind of spontaneous thinking in terms of images, and the keywords for describing it are empirical and concrete. Then Jung continues the discussion and writes, quote, we can supplement James's definitions by saying that this sort of thinking does not tire us, that it leads away from reality into fantasies of the past or future. At this point, thinking in verbal form ceases, image piles on image, feeling on feeling, and there is an ever-increasing tendency to shuffle things about and arrange them not as they are in reality, but as one would like them to be. So not in accordance with the necessities of the reality, but necessities of the inner life, necessities of the inner, the self, as Jung would say elsewhere. So how is this related to your question? I think the kind of thinking that leads to mental exhaustion is the kind of thinking that follow, I think, first of all, a very strictly conceptual demand. They are probably have a very abstract form, and they are not connected to concrete images, concrete sensations, and concrete perceptions. Because being connected to concrete sensations, perceptions, to experience, to concrete empiricals, daydreaming, these things don't tire us. They don't lead to exhaustion, even though they are a type of thinking. So that also connects to the second question you asked. How do you wind down after a long day of work or reading? Spontaneous reverie is one way. I have several go-tos. One of them is, believe it or not, is slow reading. Slow reading. Reading so slow that it accompanies automatically with a kind of imagery. So you read while you give yourself the time to imagine what it is, and you read out loud, maybe to just feel your own voice, to hear your own voice, to feel the act of speaking out loud. I also like journaling, again, slowly, irresponsibly, and YouTube is another go-to of mine. When I'm tired at the end of the day, I usually don't watch more than 1 or 2 videos. Spending time with my wife and cat also helps a lot. Calling a family member, especially now that I am in the same time zone as them, calling someone, being connected with someone, it helps a lot. Do you ever have difficulty switching off in the evenings? Yes, yeah, that happens. It happens sometimes. Sometimes because of an event during the day, you have reasons. It is justified. So you are justified sometimes. I am justified sometimes in having a difficult time, relatively difficult time, relaxing, falling asleep, or remaining asleep. I think that's acceptable. I wouldn't give myself a hard time over that, because life can be stressful sometimes. That's okay. I mean, just accepting that might makes things a little bit easier. Thank you for your questions, Niall. Sam wrote, congrats on your move. Thank you, Sam. Could you give some thoughts on the benefits and shortcomings of CBT and related behavioral therapies? Sure. I mean, it's a good idea. CBT there's a core idea in it taken from, inspired by Stoicism, Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, namely, most notably, perhaps. But aside from that core idea, I am personally not super comfortable with any method, any system that just assumes the authority of a therapist. Because therapists are human. They have flaws, they have shortcomings, there is this counter transference or projection, whatever it is, whatever it can be. And any therapeutic system comes with formulae or formulas that decide in advance the type of problems that the therapist and patients are supposed to encounter. And by doing that, they minimize the possibility of exploration, being present, being truly there with another human being, sharing the present moment with them. In my own experience, my own life, most of the experience that I've had that I would call therapeutic, most of my own therapeutic experiences, healing experiences, psychologically, spiritually healing experiences, did not come from places that were officially called therapy. They came from other places, less formal places. I had several acting classes during my graduate studies, like as extracurricular activity. And my acting classes were extremely healing, extremely therapeutic. I've had friendships that have been very therapeutic and healing. What it takes, I think, is the ability in another person, or the person's ability to have a kind of dialogue with you such that you are at least temporarily the center of attention in that dialogue. And you are accepted. I think the rest, any possible formula, CBT, behavioral therapy, any other kind of rational, emotive, whatever that title was. I'm not as excited about these categories, these known categories and camps in psychotherapy. I have a little bit more faith in psychoanalysis, but that takes a lot of investment and effort. And I also have a lot of faith in these accidents and contingent human events, meetings, encounters that end up being therapeutic without prior plans. Yeah, I think that's my response. Thank you, Sam. Peyman asked, he started by saying, hope you're fine. Thank you. I hope the same for you. What's the best or favorite memory you have studying as an undergraduate or graduate student? My best and favorite memories all have to do with my friends during undergraduate and graduate school. My friendships were kind of more satisfying, more youthful, more joyful in, my friendships with my cohort were more joyful in undergraduate. During my graduate training, most of my friends were outside of academia, outside of academic psychology. So I don't know how else to unpack on that. So the social life, I think, was a great source of meaning for me during the time I was a student. The second question is, what do you plan for the 1K Q&A? My plan is to invite my viewers to offer criticisms of what I'm doing on YouTube, how I'm doing with respect to my content and my style, to offer suggestions for improvements, in addition to asking questions. Thank you, Bayman. Rainbow Sky Gay and Proud asked a set of questions. First, What did you like about A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders? This is a great book which I have reviewed on my channel. It is a book that really reveals the point of commentary that when you accompany the reading experience of a short story with some commentary, it doesn't have to remove from the reading experience, but it adds to it. It can at least add to it. It can enrich the reading experience. And George Saunders in general offers a lot of insights that are very warm. They come from a very warm place, very human place, very compassionate place, related to both reading and writing. And the collection of stories in that book, Russian short stories from the 19th century, just so great, and they fit together really well. So the whole book is a great reading experience. Second, what did you like about Create Dangerously by Albert Camus? What I really liked about that book was the balance between, this was one of my concerns for a while before reading that book, the concern about how to balance reality and ideals when it comes to like creating a YouTube video. Do you respond most to what is in reality, or do you act based on your values? So for example, if you want to have a somewhat successful, a somewhat visible YouTube channel, do you pick the most popular young adults novel and review that or talk about that because that happens to be what is popular, fashionable, trendy? Or do you only respond to your own values and pick a book that is very unpopular, nobody knows it, but you strongly, firmly believe in it? What Albert Camus encourages us to do, the approach that he encourages, is an approach that is informed by both of those constraints. Being informed both by reality and by our ideals and our values. To perform an act, to do something in one single action, show that you are watching both reality and your interior world of values and ideals. Third, what do you like about Bertrand Russell? What I like about Russell is his clear writing, his confidence, which is, I must add, his confidence is too good to be true. Of course, it's like you can't be confident. You cannot be confident in that way in philosophy and be, in my view, you can't be confident in philosophy and be right at the same time. You can't write that history of philosophy book that he wrote in 2 volumes, 1 or 2 volumes, with that level of confidence and judgment, and go through all the philosophers and have that kind of attitude in judging them and be right at the same time. But it is fun to read him. You can write a book called like the Problems of Philosophy, and in which you kind of finalize the types of problems that philosophers tackle, and at the same time be right. But as I said, it is enjoyable to kind of at least entertain his kind of confidence. A good analogy in music, classical music, is I would think about Bertrand Russell the way I think about someone like Joseph Haydn. So Joseph Haydn in classical music has a style that you could describe as confident, beautiful, very elegant. And it is a style that you can enjoy if you're feeling okay. If I'm feeling okay, I can listen to Haydn, I can read Bertrand Russell, but I can't go to those guys when I am in despair, when I'm suffering, when I have pain, when I have like emotional, spiritual pain. I can't go read Russell. I can go read Plato. I can read Heidegger. I can read Freud, Jung, but I cannot read Russell. So to me, that is that signals something. So even though I have a fondness to Bertrand Russell, it's a fondness that is characterized in that way. I have to have the luxury to be able to enjoy them, enjoy that kind of writing. And finally, what do you like about Roman Gary? Roman Gary was one of my first literary loves. Like I fell in love with his writing. I remember very vividly finding his autobiographical book, Promise at Dawn, which is very moving, extremely sentimental, just very engaging. For me, it was very engaging. For me, it was a book that made me more self-aware. And it was a book that the first time I finished reading it, I immediately went back to the beginning and started reading it again. And I think I read it 3 times, just the first time I encountered that book, Promise at Dawn. One of the things that one of the main themes in that book is his relationship with his mother, which is a very peculiar relationship, and the formation of his own character as a response to the character of his mother and their relationship. The theme of immigration is also really important. At the time I read it, at that time, immigration was not an issue for me. I hadn't left my country at that time yet. But even then I could relate to that theme of immigration because I already had that felt sense of kind of being out of place in the world. So in a more abstract way. Thank you, Rainbow, for your questions. Ruby on YXX. Hi, Davood. Congratulations on 900. Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk about the role of reviews, what they are in essence, and how they can influence someone in a positive or negative way. I guess this applies to secondary literature as well, if you can talk about that too. Yeah, I can. I think any form of writing, any kind of intellectual, scholarly, literary activity can be mishandled. It can be potentially negative in its effects, in its consequences. And this includes reviews. I think the way reviews might have a negative impact on readers, on the audience of the reviews, would be when they replace the concrete experience of reading, the relatively more concrete experience of reading the book. Because in reviews, the concern is with the formation of reasonable taste or justified taste, justifiable and justified taste, a taste that is more aware of itself, a taste and a judgment that expresses itself, an intelligence. So to me, when somebody reviews a work, a book, a piece of music, a film, what they are doing is in part, it is many things, but one of the things it is an expression of intelligence, or at least one intelligence. And for that reason, it is something good for its own sake. But because it is relatively more conceptual and more abstract, it takes us away from the images, from the experience with a work of art. And as Niall pointed out, or as my discussion of Niall's question pointed out, that kind of detached and distant and overly conceptual or exclusively conceptual engagement might get exhausting. So it is very important to go back and forth between that position of a reviewer, position of a judge, position of somebody who's aware of their taste, of their evaluation, of why they are enjoying or not enjoying something, and then the more engaged, more immersed attitude. The attitude that just stays, if you only stay with the attitude of immersion and just close engagement, it could be a good taste, but it might not be able to justify itself. And if it is a good taste, it is probably good by accident. Anyways, I hope that was enough. Let's move on. When you do book reviews, what do you hope for people to get from them? Do you think about multiple types of audiences or just a certain type so you can focus more on the content itself? Very good question. What I hope for people to get from them is their own response. I mean, what I'm expressing is not just an evaluation, an evaluative content, a content that is carrying with it a kind of judgment. What I'm trying to share with my audience is a form of engagement. And what I hope for people is to observe that engagement and try it for themselves, not when they read the same book, but when they read a different book, to maybe remember some of the criteria that I mentioned in evaluating a book, some of the features of a book that I focus on, and then try to see if that works for them or what that reveals in their own reading experience. Or maybe that could become a point of reference for them, and then they can create their own criteria, their own way of judging what they read. But there's also at the core of this reviewing is this selfish drive to just express myself, and that's the reason why I encourage anybody who tries to do this, because I know the value of self-expression, any kind of self-expression, any kind of performance. It can be, it's a good field for exploring. It's a good way to experiment your own abilities, your own capacities, and it is open-ended. You don't know what it might result in. So it's a way to continue, to start or continue a kind of discussion. Let's go back to Ruby's question. If you had the power to change one thing about the way universities in general operate, what would it be? Do you think you would stay in academia if it functioned differently? Yeah, I would say this complements the question asked by Michelle Garner earlier. I imagine if there was less emphasis on hyperproductivity, that if people weren't so aggressive, and aggressive in every way, aggressive in seeming productive, seeming original, and seeming cheerful about all of it. It's all excessive. But that's a byproduct of the more general capitalist, neoliberal way of operation. And universities are one expression. They carry one expression of it. Do you think you would stay in academia if it functioned differently? Yeah, I think so. I think I would have stayed if it had a different function. But at the same time, I know how difficult it is to even imagine it functioning differently. And most people, most of us, most of the time, we don't even allow ourselves to imagine an alternative, let alone try to make things different. In addition to that excessive emphasis on hyperproductivity, which is not a good thing, one other thing that I imagine is tolerance and having enough space for a plurality of approaches. Again, not only in terms of content, but also form. The current state of academia is not tolerant of plurality of forms of scholarship, and I think it should be. All right, I think the video has gone for too long, and we should stop it. Thank you so much for all your great questions. Thank you for giving me a chance to think with your questions, and hope I answered some of your questions in a satisfactory way. I look forward to our continued engagement on this channel, and I will speak with you in the next video.